Okay, friends, welcome back to Day to Day Dev, a podcast about the daily life of a game designer. I am Keith Franks from Cutlass Board Games, and I am joined with Steve Dee of Tinstar Games. And last night was the last Tuesday of the month, which is our regular playtesting group in the city of Sydney, where for the last couple of months it's been kind of dry. We've been looking at maybe peak of 6, but then last night we had our biggest turnout for a while. We got like 11 people or so.
I think it was 12 at the end.
Yeah. Which was really good. We got some fresh faces. We got to see some cool new games. I got to play one of Steve's games for a second time. I did not like it more the second time than the first. I think that's actually the start with that. So the game is Kangaroo Caribou, and it's not a bad game, but I personally dislike it because I feel like every time I play it deals psychic damage to me, because the game asks you to interpret a card quicker than other people, and I'm relatively competitively. I would like to do it quicker than other people, but it's hard. And what we tested was adding more and more variations of rules. So you go assess the card. Does this meet rule 1? Does this meet rule 2? And you're going on and on and on. And you're trying to do this with haste. And the entire time I'm just like, this hurts. It's tough, right? So I'm curious, what's been working on that? Like, what's been balancing that? What's been did you get good feedback that helped you change some stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you've sort of hit there is that there's a lot of different types of players out there, and we had a great variety, which was good, and it's important to play a little bit maybe with people who really don't like your style of games, but also to sometimes realize that that's just going to happen.
Well, if someone hates something, you'll get pretty good information on a particular pinch point that they got like rubbed against.
Yeah.
Which is like something, but also not everyone's going to love your game anyway.
So another person there bought this game that was about basically manipulating these caterpillars that are 3-dimensional objects, so that you can get them into the right position to get a goal on a map. And I am really bad at 3-dimensionally manipulating things.
Yeah, same.
So I was like, this is not a game for me. I suck at this. I am always going to lose. But I will try to go, okay, what would help me play this? What would make me like it more? So I was like, okay, maybe a tutorial, maybe some really easy maps, maybe like a solo mode where you can learn it out.
You're spending as much time as you can, but just trying to solve the puzzle, however many moves it takes or whatever.
Yeah. And also just going, well, what do I like about it? I do like the theme. I like how cute the pieces are, and that's a good challenge for you to go, look, this isn't for me, but there's almost every game has something interesting in it or something cool.
Absolutely.
And you can lock in and go, well, that's really good. And pass that feedback on.
While we're on that, the designer of this, Elise, is actually a good friend of mine. And it's kind of funny because we actually met for the first time at a Tabletop Tuesday, but like 4 or 5 years ago or something, right? Because this is before I started running the event. And this game, I think, and you touched on it, like everything has something unique to it, but this game has like a lot of really cool stuff in it. The whole thing packs up and fits in a keychain. It's maybe this big.
It's maybe
not exaggerating. Like it's literally tiny, right? And it's this whole game that falls out into a grid, and it's got 3D printed pieces. Like the box itself collapses to become the actual grubs that move around, and it's really, really interesting. And I've seen some of the development journey of this game, right? But it's so fucking hard to play. She set up a tutorial for us. We kind of played through the tutorial, had an idea of what was going on. She goes, okay, this is what the default map kind of should be. Like the two people trying to beat each other to try and win kind of map. And I think Ryan, who I was playing against, and I both made a mistake early on and missed the point of what the puzzle was to solve. Because there was only a specific way that you could get to the goal, and that you could do things to interact with your opponent to slow them down or whatever. And we just kind of fought each other and moved away from whatever the path was so far that we couldn't find it again, and ended up just rolling around. And I ended up winning by pinning him in a corner. It was like, we can't figure out the victory condition or how to get there at all. I'm just gonna just stop you from playing the game. That's my goal here.
Um,
And so I think that's got to be like hard to work on and test, and maybe why these events are really, really good, because you'll see people struggle.
yeah,
You'll see me struggle playing Kangaroo Caribou, or me complaining about it relentlessly.
yeah, yeah,
And then that'll give you good eyes on what is this player's character profile. Like, you go, okay, Keith
yeah,
likes to be able to do funky, weird, exciting different things, maybe bend the rules of the game. When he has to do anything at speed, he doesn't particularly like feeling rushed. So maybe
yeah,
this game isn't, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Every game has a player profile, as you said,
mm,
and it's okay to bring in those that don't fit. So we also have Lee, who makes pretty tight Euro games. He's a real strategic and tactical player, and
mm,
he was immediately just going, "I'm going to play this. I'm going to quickly identify a way that I can win this, and maybe even break it by playing like that." And it's probably the case that like the game is more for, you know, 6 to 8 year olds. They're not going to play
mm,
like that, but it's still useful for me to find those points
yeah,
because um, I have to figure out how to address those, and it might just be like this is a game for kids. Like we just try to telegraph that as much as possible, or it might be finding a rules answer or something because. Yeah, you want to just know that it's out there. You don't want to be blindsided to put out a game and then someone goes, "Oh, by the way, you know,
here's an
I'm not your."
exploit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if it's always good to sort of because that to sort of say, well, that came up in playtesting, but we addressed it like this, or we chose not to
yeah,
do that, because then at least you don't look like you didn't test it.
yeah. Or
If
you
you've
just
gone,
completely blindsided by
yeah,
something.
yeah,
I feel like that
you can't
happens
predict
to Magic the
everything.
Gathering a lot, right? Like they go, "Yeah, here's some really cool ideas," and then it comes out and people go, "Bro, this is insane," like all
Yeah,
the
I mean,
time.
we did talk a little bit about that last time, and that when you have like 1 million players, you're going to get a lot
Mm,
more people able to find those edge cases. But yeah, it's it's also, I mean, that's why these companies tend to do a lot of beta testing with their fans so they can get this sort of information.
mm.
Um, and yeah, it's often the fans who are just way more across. Like there's somebody out there who remembers every single Magic card and go, right, I can see a
Yeah.
combo with that with something from Ice Age,
Well,
and you're like,
especially
oh,
in Magic, right? Because you're rewarded for knowing all the cards. Your
yeah,
depth of knowledge of the game is rewarded in how many. Because there's one card that solves every specific problem, and if you remember every card, you know every card that solves a specific problem. But then
yeah,
also they'll make stuff, and you go, "Ooh, this has power in it, but only if maybe this such effect exists." And then they go, "Hey, we've made this such effect because it does something cool with this other thing." And you go, "I don't care. This broken thing exists already that we're going to do it with, right?"
I
And I
think it's
think people look for that all the time in every
yeah,
game.
oh yeah, absolutely. But I also think what's interesting there is that often players have very different incentives to designers. Like
Mm,
players spend a lot of their time going through and finding these things and memorizing these things, and designers are, they do some of that. They're fans of the game, but
mm.
they're often coming from a very different point of view where they have to exploit new spaces.
Well, they're
Um,
future focused rather than present
that's right,
focused.
exactly. Um, and so yeah, they're going to be a sort of conflict of like, oh yeah, you guys know and want very different things to what the designers are trying to do. Doesn't
Mm.
mean you're trying to make a good game for your players, but yeah, there's a different sort of set of motivations.
Well, I also think it's interesting because let's say the world's greatest Magic the Gathering player is
Hmm.
probably a bad game developer,
Yeah, exactly.
and
That's the
the
other thing.
best
Yeah,
Magic the Gathering developer is probably a rubbish Magic the Gathering player. Now, from
if you
memory, I
try,
know
yeah,
only some pros end up like being invited to R&D or the test team or whatever like that. But
Hmm.
you got to understand that the overlap between these two things is very different. And in cases outside of Magic the Gathering, even your best ever player, like the world's greatest Castles of Kalira player, let's pretend it's not me, is going to have different insights to me, right?
yeah,
But they might be from I want this kind of power level in the game, or I want this kind of thing in the game. The players aren't motivated by stuff like feel or emotional journey or what the player target market, all this kind of stuff is going to be. So it's really hard to see what the kind of interaction with that your vision versus the everyone else's final vision or sees it as even.
Yeah, and that's a good thing about how playtest can give you really good information, but they can't always see all the variables, so they're not always able to give you a lot of clarity. They can give you really good things, but they might be like, well, yeah, but you don't have to consider every other aspect that I do to sell this game or make this game.
Yeah.
And also, though, it just reminded me that if you spend enough time with game designers, almost all of them say, "Yeah, I'm really bad at this game."
Yeah.
I made it, I designed it, but everyone else can beat me at it. And that's as we say, because you've just got a different kind of brain on. There's going to be a few other. There's going to be some counter examples. I mean, the game we were talking about with the grubs, because there was a huge learning curve in how they moved. So the designer of that was way ahead of people.
Just because she'd played 20 more games, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But so the first thing I said to her is like, stop playing. We'll get you 2 players so that you can see 2 novices play, and solve that problem. And that's the thing why you go to these events as well. So you're not constantly just having to test with you and one other person.
Well, you could potentially do blind testing. You could do open testing, and you can do coached testing. And I think most people, especially hobby designers, right, for the most part, only get to do coached testing.
Yep.
I almost never do blind testing, which is crazy to consider how many games I've made, and very rarely do blind testing. But it's, I guess I should kind of go through the types because I guess it's not super obvious. Yep. But coach testing is I have a game, I want to play it with you to teach you how to play the game so you understand what's going on. Blind testing is here's the box, all the rules and everything is included. Maybe I have some supplementary material in case it's hard to learn, or you have like an FAQ sheet or something. And then those people without you present go and play the game and then give you feedback. I think lots of different types have different kinds of merits because if you're coaching, you guarantee the rules of the game are going to be as correct as possible. In blind testing, from what I've heard of other people doing it, and even just blind reviewers picking up your game and playing your game with the materials you send them, even though you are available, will get stuff wrong. And they're playing a 90% accurate version of your game. And sometimes that 10% makes a big difference. And that's kind of hard. But it can still get you good feedback, because that 10% that they missed might be something that you've just done a shit job of writing in the rule book, or needed a diagram, or these kinds of things.
Yeah, that's really the biggest part of blind play testing is not, well, there is some of testing the mechanics, but it's testing the communication of the mechanics.
Yeah.
Do people know what the hell you're talking about? Not only are the rules clear, but are the symbols clear? Is it clear from the board and the tokens which way they're supposed to go, and who, where they go on the board and what you're trying to do, and all that sort of stuff. And like you were saying earlier, you sort of lost your goal when you were playing the Grubs game, the 3D game, and made up your own game. That's something that can only really happen in blind play testing.
Yeah, I just went for the ultimate win condition.
Yeah, and that's really useful because then you can go, okay, what are these sort of slightly weirder edge cases? Because if you're there, you're subconsciously always going, no, don't do that, or you're not going to do that. And even with sort of non-verbal and non-conscious things, your presence can actually shape how people play.
True. If they're asking you questions or whatever.
Yeah.
Because we did a semi-blind thing. We had her around for the introductory game that we played, and then she did the setup, and then Elisa was called away to playtest a different game. So the whole like official version thing was almost completely blind.
Yep.
And I feel like we were pretty accurate to what was supposed to happen, but I feel like we just strategically completely missed the point. And I think it would have been interesting, especially if she's like going and testing and doing data and stuff like this. You would go, okay, there's 2 win conditions. One is collecting the goal, and the other one is forcing your opponent into a no moves scenario. So you go, okay, we played 4 games and only 1 victory condition was triggered. Maybe we need to change something about the game or whatever. You know what I mean? And I think that kind of data as well would also be really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's there's all sorts of things that you can record from a playtest. First thing, there's the basic numbers, and a lot of people are good at going like who won, what were the final scores,
Mm,
what were the difference in the scores, and if there's any like particular thing like how many set collections you had versus whatever the other variable is or something. But you also want to look at things that we talked about before, which you can only get in commentary, like what were the pinch points, what was hard to
mm,
understand, when did you get your moment of flow and getting what's going on, um, and some of that you can't get by questioning. Some of it you have to
yeah,
do by observation. So you're
yeah.
looking around the table, which is another reason why you don't always want to be playing as well, because you want to be watching everyone's faces and seeing
Yeah, because when you're
when they
playing,
tune out.
you not only feel like you're the game master in your ensuring that the game is running, but also as a game player, you're participating in a certain amount.
Yeah, yeah,
And sometimes as a game player, I don't, Kangaroo Caribou is one that's asymmetric. Everyone is independent of each other. But like, let's say you're testing a strategy game or something like that. You're still, as a player in the game, operating as a guide rail for every other player. Like
yeah,
if you're playing a King of the Hill type thing, if you charge ahead and you're using a strategy that is going to absolutely dominate every other player at the table, that's going to be different from if you were super passive or whatever. But the
yeah,
players that have never played the game before are going to witness the actions and choices that you're making as a guidepost to figure out what kind of things they think that they're supposed to be doing.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
that can color something as well. I think Kangaroo Caribou, the hardest game name in the universe to pronounce quickly, is a actually a really good example of a different kind of testing because all you're doing in the game is the exact same thing as every other player. I
Yeah,
don't think that there's a particular way that you could do something differently that other players would go, oh, that's a great strategy. I'm going to do that and be influenced by what you're doing. So you can be relatively neutral, but you're still kind of
mm,
watching. But
yeah,
you could have also been doing what I normally do when I do playtesting is when I do the introductory game, I play dog shit. I just, the worst version of what I could be doing. I'm not thinking about stuff. I'm just kind of running through the motions, making sure I'm playing the cards correctly and that kind of stuff. And just doing like
mm,
no strategy, not paying attention to what's going on. And with stuff like bluffing and deception games, when I'm like, yeah, I just all this stuff, big brain, I am really smart. You won't be able to figure out what I'm doing. It's totally a bluff. And people are like, man, I just can't read Keith at all. I'm like, yeah, because there's nothing there to read.
yeah,
Or like in castles, I'm just like, yeah, I'm just playing whatever the cards are that I got. I'm not really thinking about what I'm doing. Um, but then, yeah, with stuff like a party game, I guess you are able to kind of be there and just ensure that the game flows well without necessarily influencing the other players and able to spend the time, observing. Like you could have just, in
mm,
theory, just never called any result, just
yeah,
made no attempt to score anything for the game, and just kind of spectated, right? But been there and just
yeah,
had a turn, or maybe some collected some loser points intentionally or something like that. Which I think is also fine as long as the players don't realize you're working in the game, then
yeah.
it's
That's
it's
right. Yeah,
probably okay.
yeah, yeah. I mean, with this, it's fairly simple, so you can hover a bit and do a little bit of both. But yeah,
mm,
you can definitely go in and go, this is what I'm going to do.
mm,
But as you say, as soon as the game gets a little bit more complicated, that's going to cause these trickle down effects on
yeah.
how other people play. And yeah, often really what you really want is just to sit quietly and watch, so you can take notes the whole way through.
Yeah, because I guess it depends on what the game is, right? Because let's say they're playing Warhammer 40,000 for the very, very
Yeah,
first time. This game has never been played by anyone else before. It's the very, very first version. You've just made
hang on.
Warhammer 40,000. Congratulations, right? And then what's happening is they're running their first game, and something happens that's a mistake that you've noticed and they've not noticed. You probably don't need to point it out, and they can keep running it wrongly,
Mm,
but if they ask you specifically, they go, oh, this doesn't make sense. Or hang on, that seems really, really strong. Is that correct? Then you go, oh, actually, it is like this. But you make a note that this particular
yeah,
part was misunderstood. I think interrupting the flow of the play to maintain accuracy, sometimes when it's just like a maths thing or something like that, it's usually not a big deal. Because I've run copies of my game before where people have been like, oh, yeah, I'm doing this thing. And they're like super confident about what they're doing. I'm like, that's fine. I'd rather not. Like, interrupt them having a good moment or having something working really well for them, just to be like, oh, actually, it's not quite like this, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's a good point. Is that there is an advantage sometimes. Well, like you want your game generally to be played as you've written it,
Mm.
but if people are making an interesting mistake and having fun making that mistake, that's not something you necessarily want to interrupt.
Yeah,
They may
exactly.
they may have just found a better way to play your game for
Yeah,
starters.
something for you
So
to
that
add.
yeah, you have to resist that urge to go. That's not the rule now.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe it's the rule for this game.
I think doing nothing and taking notes, unless asked, is a pretty good place to start when it takes to playtesting. And then
Yep.
after game one, then you go, okay, what did you guys think? What was your feedback? Did you have any questions? Blah blah blah. Go through all that kind of stuff, and then have
Yep.
some good questions, like debrief type stuff, like what did you think about this part, or how did you feel about this? And then go, oh, actually, according to my notes, by the way, you guys missed this thing. Can you explain to me how you got to here, or was this just a misunderstanding? Did you miss this part of the like? And try and find out the nature of the misunderstanding, because
Yep.
sometimes people will just miss stuff, or some people will learn the game thinking that was what it was. And so if someone's just accidentally drawn an extra card one time, is a bit different than a person who was like, yeah, you're supposed to draw 2 cards every turn. That's how
Yep.
Magic the
Yep.
Gathering's always been. You know what I mean? So trying
Yep.
to find out that in a debrief at the end is going to be much easier than in the moment when the person is focusing on what they're doing. So I think stopping play too often is going to be detrimental to the playtest. And then being a pillar yourself in there is going to be really detrimental to the playtest, depending on maybe the complexity of the game. So I think for a simpler thing, it's probably fine. But this is all just from just yesterday, right? Just from our playtesting event yesterday. We got to see a lot of different stuff and show off some stuff.
Sometimes it can help to be in the game to just get a bit of energy going and to properly demonstrate it.
Your own hype,
especially
man.
if the game, well, it hypes the energy up and gets people involved, but it also can be like it's easy to learn when someone is demonstrating.
Yeah.
So there are reasons that you want to sometimes, especially early on when things are a bit vague, you might really want to get in there. Depends on the crowd you're working with as well. Like if someone's just sort of wandered up to your booth and they're like, oh, what's going on? You have to maybe sit down with them and go, okay, we're going to play this cool game together.
Yeah, I do like
that.
Trying to pull the person from the crowd into the game.
Yeah.
But what you said, I think, is just really funny, right? Because you're not a super verbose person. I don't know you as being a ridiculous extrovert that is just like sending energy out into the universe, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're like bringing energy to the game is tough. And I think a lot of game designers like myself are an introvert. I look like an extrovert because I just spend a lot of energy doing it and it's detrimental to my health, but it's how I feel like I have to be, right? But when you're running your game, bringing energy to the other people can look very different. Like a lot of gamers are probably also going to be introverts, and matching their energy or doing things that make them feel comfortable is just as much in the same way doing that. For example, I watched you run games of the score at PAX. And so Steve's sitting there. He's got 3 people at the table, and there's 3 or 4 people standing by watching, right? Because this man was packed the entire time. And I think I saw like the very beginning of you doing character generation, right? And you've gone through, you've explained this is how you make a character, and the other people are like, okay, I'm kind of figuring it out. I'm doing it one step at a time, even though he said all of the steps, right? And you're like, okay, this is my thing. I'm now working on the next one. And then Steve goes, okay, this is what I've done. This is my guy's name, which is a funny joke, and this is the funny picture I've drawn of the character. And then people go, okay, not only is this an example for me to follow and figure out, this is a cool icebreaker. I think that was like a really good example of helping people get into the thing, which is like maybe run a simulation of one step or something, or putting something in someone's hand and being like, you've now just done this. This is how you know what I mean? Finding a way to get the action moving or the conversation starting that isn't exposition. Like if you're watching a movie and they go, 7,000 years ago, there was this thing invented and it was really important to the political impact of this particular group. And you're like, I know nothing about the characters. I don't even really know why I'm here. And you're just receiving an explode of information. It can be hard to feel engaged for a lot of types of players. I know I'm usually pretty fine. I'm like, yeah, okay, what's going on? But
Um,
it's you got to try and match that with what the different people are like and how they're working. And sometimes you can borrow someone else's energy. Like if someone is super extroverted, you can be like, okay, this is our chief. I need
yeah.
this person to, and like give them responsibilities that are like communication based or stuff like that. I think about these things a lot so that I don't have to be as extroverted as possible.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is you're trying to to find shortcuts and things to make it easier.
Mm,
There's a lot of like it's not quite the same thing, but because your player testers hopefully are paying a bit more attention than the average player or someone you're demoing to, but
mm,
they all involve teaching. You
mm.
have to teach your game and you have to communicate your game, and that's what a rules document does as well. So it's really worth understanding how teaching works and how to teach well, whether that's watching, like there's a bunch of videos like this Shut Up and Sit Down guys have a video on how to teach. I think there's a thing on Dice Tower now called Teach the Teach, where they show you what makes good teaching. I've actually worked as a tutor and a teacher in university, so I've got a bit of experience there. Whatever it is that you can do to learn to be a good teacher is going to help you be a better playtester
Mm.
because you'll learn how to communicate well, how to get people into things quickly, how to spot different types of learners,
Yeah.
and who isn't getting things and who's a bit behind
Well,
and
being
who
able to
needs
get a
help.
read on people in general, right?
Yeah, that's
I
right.
think would
Yeah,
help a lot because if you can discern what type of a learner a person is, if you can discern what a person's player profile is, if you can
yeah,
discern if a person is more shy and introverted or like really outgoing and extroverted, all these kind of things and data that you can pick up about a person quickly can help you figure out the best way to interact with them to get them engaged in doing stuff.
yeah,
I think that kind of stuff is really important. Like as a game designer, especially if one that is customer facing and is just not just pitching, like you maybe are responsible for marketing your game or running demos or whatever. Having really good communication skills doesn't necessarily mean you have to be super charismatic and extroverted. Sometimes just listening is a really good communication skill, or
yeah,
making a person feel really listened to is
yeah,
like also really important, and being able to learn and sharpen those skills can be just as important as knowing every single mechanic that is on the BGG top 10 list. Like
yeah,
a lot of
yeah,
these things come together to help you build your career around being able to make an experience, which is basically a recipe that people open up out of the box. Like Sarah Lee's triple chocolate cake is the
yeah,
same as a board game because it has a list of ingredients and a recipe on the back that tells you how to have fun,
yeah, yeah,
right? You have to be able to do the same thing and communicate these things to the player so that they can enjoy eating the chocolate cake. But
yeah,
maybe there's players that don't eat it. Maybe there's players that collect it. Maybe there's players that do. I'm running out of funny lists of things you can do with cake because I should have done a more flexible analogy. But
yeah,
finding out how the different players going to use the game is only going to work if you have good communication skills or being able to communicate the game in a flexible enough way so people can do the flexible different things. I think is
yeah,
also important because the thing I say a lot, right, is open the box, drink the contents like soup, have a great time is still a valid use for a board game, even
yeah,
though it's not what the designer intended. If the person is
yeah,
having fun with the
absolutely.
product, that's the point.
Yeah.
Like,
And that comes back to that thing about not interrupting is that
mm,
you're not necessarily an expert on how someone has fun,
exactly.
or with even with your own game, and that's to some extent outside of your control. It's not like it's an static art form. I painted this. It has one meaning.
Mm,
Look at it. Um, this is a tool that you're giving to people, and if they go, oh, actually, we're going to do this with the game, that's valid and it's great, and
mm,
and they might have a better idea than you of what's the most fun, or they might just be something that you want to allow. And I think a lot of sometimes with playtesting is going not so much changing the game, but putting things in the rules or in the communication to go, hey, you can do that, and this is
yeah.
okay. Especially with things like role playing games and stuff, is a lot of what we ended up doing is not so much changing the rules, but going, if you want to do this, here's the bits of the book to look at. Or if you really like to do it, like if you like random character generation, we've got lots of
Mm,
random tables, but if you want to choose, do it like this. If you want to make these kind of characters, you can do that. And when we did the score, we also put like a little we did an expansion booklet which just has things like, hey, you can do it this. And that came a lot from the playtesters as well. People were like,
Mm.
"Oh, I really want to do like sequels," and we're like, "Okay, yeah, we'll make mechanics for that." And it's not in the core game, but it's something to go. Yeah, some people wanted that, and they're finding these pathways that you can only get through testing, and
Mm.
that's why testing is so important. Is that the you can't really know what your game is until a couple of people at least have tried to do things. You know,
I
they
like
get the
that.
tool and go,
That's
yeah,
a good line. So in my favorite movie and the greatest movie of all time, Birdman, The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance,
yep,
there's a line in it where he says, the preview is about finding out what the play is going to be. It does all the rehearsal and
yeah,
stuff that are done beforehand. All the writing is meaningless. You get out on the stage and then you find the energy for what it is going to be. I think
yeah,
playtesting can be the same. Like
yeah,
we ran a game where Paul and I, Paul who is also a longtime friend of the Tabletop Tuesday events,
yeah,
playtested a game, and the guy's core mechanic is the thing that he's struggling to find out, and it's got a lot of good ideas in it, right? And the core of what he has is really good in the way that it's presented. And he's trying to
yeah,
figure out the exact mathematical system to determine how things resolve. And he was here last month, and last month it was basically cards numbered 1 to 5, and then there was a modifier that would add 1 or -1 depending on what the color was. And what we found was every time we're playing, is we're going, okay, here's my 3 things. Okay, but hang on, this is 1 plus 1, and then plus the 3, and then minus the 1 here, and then plus, and it's like, this is too many operations, and it like slows it down and it gets
yep,
like drainy, right? And then he came back this month and was like, okay, actually, this is a poker hand. We're going to do the best poker hand, and he's made it more complicated in simplifying the system. So you're just looking at the overall collection of something. And
yep,
then Paul and I both played it, and we're like, okay, but like this is still the thing that is the problem. All of the adornments are great, but you still need to figure out exactly what this is going to be. And we tried to suggest a whole bunch of stuff, right? But every single thing that we suggested is just a whole different game.
yeah,
And I think that is a lot of some of the stuff to consider, right? In even that, and especially because we're designers, getting designer feedback in how I see a game is very different from how someone else is going to see a game. We've made this
yep,
joke before, actually, where like Alan Cheshire and I are like the complete opposite end of the spectrum, where if I see something, I'm like, yeah, you should scale this back, you should remove these things and make it like a really light and simple version where people can add fun to it. And then Alan is like, nah, just add all this stuff. If it needs 80 cards, it has 80 cards and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, surely the designer needs to find the right spot rather than any one particular person's opinion in having played at one time.
yeah,
And I think that if this game was presented to me as a product and I played it and I go, okay, this is how it is right now, but then I have the option to change it in how I want to make it fit into something or into something else, and I go, okay, maybe this is the way that I take it, or this is the way that I take it, and seeing how Paul had different ideas about it, how I had different ideas about it, about how Ryan, the designer, had different ideas about the core of it coming together. It was really interesting and like really illustrates exactly what you were just talking about, where this could be 10 games. This could be 10 completely different games with the same set of cards, and only because of the way that we interpreted what was going on, or our suggestion for how something was going on, meant that we gave meaning to the components. We gave meaning to this experience and created something. And that is every single board game. Like, all you're building is a sandbox, all you're building is a recipe. And I think RPGs is a good analogy for that as well, because RPGs are literally a recipe book. Yep. And some people get bogged down in playing it exactly rules as written. And then some people, like for example, my roommate is a longtime D&D DM, and he'll just do whatever. He'll be like, if everyone's having fun doing this thing, this is the thing that is important. We will do this thing, and the story is the important part. Because the fun stories that you're telling about people later is the fun and important thing. Actually, have we gone over the different types of fun on the podcast? I don't think we have.
I mean, it'd be definitely worth to go through. Like, well, we talked a little bit about player profiles this episode. We should probably go into some of the sort of the various taxonomies of kinds of enjoyment. Yeah.
So there's a running joke that I usually use, just a quick way of describing the types of fun. There's the it's fun right now, and it's fun talking about it later, which is most games, and then something amazing happens, then you get to talk about it later. There's the It's not fun right now. In fact, it's terrible, but it's fun to talk about later. Which was me walking down to the shops to get snacks, and I sneezed so hard my headphones fell off. I was pretty angry in the moment, but it's pretty funny to talk about it later.
Yep.
And then there's something that is not fun in the moment and is not fun later upon reflection, which is League of Legends. So you can make anything. It's still a product, it still exists, and millions of people still play it. So knowing how something happens, like for me, Kangaroo Caribou is not very fun at the moment, but I have a lot of fun joking about it and talking about it around other stuff, right? Because the game's not specifically for me, but I can understand what goes into it, and we joke about it because a lot of designers have different banter about products and stuff like that. And it could be a fantastic game for exactly the target market, and that could be the same for a lot of people. Like in how they interpret a specific product, they go, D&D is not for me because of this particular reason, because maybe it's not fun at the moment. But then people are telling a lot of stories about it with their friends about the stupid thing that happened or how everything went wrong, and that's still fun, right? So I think some of these things are also important and worth considering, especially because like some of the best games or like most money-making games are like terrible. And then also just terrible to think about or like not fun to talk about later or stuff like this, which I think is really interesting.
There was actually a question that we had that sort of ties into this, and someone on my Facebook wanted us to know, how do you know when an idea is good? And I think first of all, I want to come back to that thing where you often have 10 games to start with.
Yeah.
That happens to me a lot. I'll get an idea for a game and I'm like, oh, this that, or it could be that, it could be this, it could be really simple for kids, or it could be really complicated. And often you'll get a few steps in, and also you'll be where Ryan was, as you said, he's trying to find out what that core mechanic is. And I think this is sort of an oblique answer to like, is there is no easy answer to know if your idea is good. You have to build it to find out.
Well, I guess it's got to match your core parts of like kind of the job you're trying to do here, the expression it's trying to make, right? Let's pretend we have the 10 options, like exactly 10 options on what this game could have been, and each of them is a door. And then you go, okay, my core precept is I want the game to be played quickly. It needs to be under 10 minutes for an entire thing to be completed. Okay, some doors close.
Yeah.
I need this age group. Some doors close. And then you go, okay, these are my options now. How do these games work? How do I make these things the best products it can be? And then you had 10 good ideas. But how you've decided which one is the good idea for this product is important, I think.
I think that's also something that you get better at over time, because when you start game designing, you don't really know what you're good at or what you're capable of at a certain situation.
Absolutely.
So you go, I could actually make anything. And so you don't know how to close some doors. And that's one of the reasons why I'm always saying make something small, make something fast, because it just forces a lot of those doors closed.
Or the other way around, people, I see a lot of people design something where the target market is themselves. And because they go, I think this is good, they can't see what some of the other doors are because they haven't interacted with other people playing the product or seeing how played enough games, because that can also be a problem.
Yeah. Or similarly, sometimes you can be playing too many because then you don't know how to shut those doors as well. You're like, oh, I like that, and I like that, and I like that.
Could do it all.
So part of it is just trying to figure out how to shut some doors is a good idea too. And that can happen where you just go, right, pick something arbitrary, pick a mechanic, pick something that you might be good at, pick something you can access. Pick a weird challenge or something, or pick a part of the setting is another thing. Like this setting is absolutely about this, so anything that doesn't match that can be cut away.
Yeah. But what player does this setting appeal to? Right?
Yeah.
So if you have a theme that's more specifically catered towards children, then that might close some doors for you.
Yeah. And that comes also back to who you can play test with. Like last night we were stuffing around making a game. We had 6 people, which meant we could actually make a pretty big game about passing cards around. If we'd only had 2 people, we'd have to make a different kind of game because we just didn't have the play testers. And I think that is probably why there's a lot of games that are 2 to 4 players, because that's easy to get play testing for. It's harder to test a game for 5 or 6 because it's harder to organize that many players. So you have to look around at sort of what you've got, and those restrictions though are going to shape the funnel of as you put things together. And it also might be, as I say, like what have you got in your cupboard?
Mm.
Like a lot of the times, that's how I'll figure out what a game is by getting the pieces of paper out and going, what, this has to be square things. Okay, do I have any square things? Right. Is it about colors? Okay, I'll get some pens out. And then I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, it is about colors, green and blue. And I might not know what I might start with what they mean. Like, okay, this game has to have ocean or these four different types of customers. So I'll get four pens out for them. And as soon as I do that, I go, okay, yeah, the red customer, they want to buy food. The green customer wants to buy vegetables just because I've got color ideas in my mind.
Yeah. That's good. That's really
So
good.
yeah, whatever it is that the physical part of it, it's interacting with other players, but also interacting with physical things,
Mm.
moves things out of your brain into a really concrete way. And there was a lot of people. I remember when computers first came in, because I'm really really old. A lot of people were afraid that they would sort of uh, get rid of the power of the pencil, because there is
Mm.
something really fundamental in using your physical hands to write things down, and that's why they
Mm.
often talk about it. Like for writers, write your first draft in pencil or pen on paper. Especially if you're stuck, if you're having writer's block, get out a pen and paper and write it out with your hands, because the physicality of that will just change how you're seeing the ideas.
Makes it real
And
and gets it out of your head in a different way than putting it onto a
yeah,
computer. For
yeah. I
sure.
mean, that's what last night when we were brainstorming, I was trying to write some things down for that reason as well. Just because if we could
Mm.
see an idea on the paper, it
Absolutely.
was it was a bit different than just talking about it in our heads and being sort of up here,
Yeah.
out of in the air where it's not concrete.
So I
Um,
do I do actually want to talk about Purple Dog for a minute.
yeah, sure.
So yesterday we had a whole bunch of people, and the way that we normally run the event is we will put up everyone that has a game. We're like, yeah, I have a game. Put their name up on the board. Put the name of the game up on the board. The number of players, the number of minutes, and so on. And then usually, after the first third of just kind of networking, everyone's kind of shown up. We go, okay, we're gonna put players into games so that everyone's playing something or something, showing something, or everyone's kind of has an activity to do. And then after we kind of ticked off most of the things, we had one game that was running along, and we had a bunch of people kind of left over. And
Yep.
I was just like, you know what? Let's just do a game jam. Let's just fucking make a game right now. And we got 6 people, right? And so we're all sitting around this table with 6 people. And shout out to Ryan, who was just super prepared for this.
Yeah.
Had a whiteboard, had his iPad, had a whole bunch of blank cards and stuff, so we could set up and make a game straight away.
Yeah.
Just because I think he's like really good at rapid iterating on the thing that he's currently working on, which is kind of in that category.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, let's build a thing. So Steve's on the whiteboard. He's writing down ideas as we come across, and we had some just really wild shit out the gate. And we moved past things really quickly, right? So there was like, here's a thing, okay, written down. Okay, here's a thing and how we could use that. And we go, well, actually, but it might work better if we have this other thing. It's like, okay, bam, next thing, puts down the next thing, and we come along. And then we kind of hit a spot where we had a really loose core idea. And then it was
Yeah.
like, but we need cards to do this. So it's like, okay, stop. We're making the deck of cards. And we made this 49 deck of cards where each person was basically just had a texter and drew an animal. I drew what you could imagine a Celtic rune of a giraffe looks like, because drawing a real giraffe is too hard. And we had some like dogs and cats, and in different colors, right? Because we were building some kind of a set collecting thing. And what's funny is the set collecting game that we ended up with just like regular animals and colors and stuff like that, was really far away from the like. At the start, we were like, here's an idea, and like, oh yeah, like Letters to Whitechapel, and like referencing all these like really heavy games and heavy mechanics, and like a 1-verse many, maybe a 2-verse many, all this kind of stuff. And what was interesting was we ended up boiling it down to something that we could playtest on the day. We could physically put together and have a look at and put some ideas to. And what we ended up with was a deck that could be literally any game, but we added something to it. We came up with a cool drafting mechanic. We were able to put some stuff together and see how it would work. We wanted to try out some partners mechanics, and it didn't really take. Every game we were testing it where we had a partner, and everyone's like, my partner is irrelevant. And I think that as an exercise, it was really valuable. What were you think? How are you feeling coming out of that?
I was impressed that we got out of the ideas stage, because there was a moment where I thought we were just going to be like, no one's picking anything
Yeah.
And six people is a lot to
Yeah.
try to get everyone's ideas.
Yeah.
But what it showed again is how important prototyping is, because once we started to have cards, we could actually test,
Yeah,
and
because if
that's really
someone
the thing.
goes, let's do this, you go,
Yeah,
how do the cards fit into that? And they go, oh no, wait. You know, well, we spent all this time making the cards. Let's stick to the
yeah, that's
cards.
right. Yeah. Um, and it also let us like find out if something worked, because everyone's like, yeah, we want to make
Mm,
this partners game. Oh, okay, so
mm.
there's all, and we had like all these different rules about partners, and then we played one round and we went, oh, we've completely forgot about a
My
partner.
partner
So
is irrelevant. Yeah.
we knew instantly that our mechanics didn't match our goal, so we
Yeah.
had to make a decision. Do we get rid of the goal, or do we change the mechanics? And that ability to test your hypothesis
Mm,
is what helps, because early on when you've got an idea, you can't test anything. You go, yeah, that should work, but you don't know. And
mm.
games, what I find good about games is that sometimes you can write a story or something and go, you can have an idea that it kind of works, but you're not sure if it's good. But you can
Mm.
test games very accurately. You can go, I want people to do have these kind of reactions and have this kind of play experience. Um, and then you can run a test and go, did that happen? Oh, it didn't. Right. Or oh, it did, or it did. How much? Like, you
Mm.
can really get a mathematical outcome almost, like a
Mm.
science experiment, and that's very satisfying. To be able to go, like when I was like one of the first things I wanted to do building relics is that, so that's a role playing game about angels, and one about all great angel and demon movies is there's a bit in the middle where they always have these philosophical arguments about, what's God's role, and is God cruel and everything like that. And pretty early on when we were playtesting, that started to happen. I was like, right, that's my proof of concept. I wanted that. I wanted people to start arguing about
Organically.
philosophy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I like that.
and if you can go try and yeah, one of my friends who designs, actually, his always thing, he identifies the key gaming experience he's trying to create, as opposed
Mm.
as his template to start. Not so much like, I want to make a game that's like Ticket to Ride or something. He's like, I want that bit in Ticket to Ride where you feel good because you've made your big route. Like, he'll
Yeah.
pick
You've
an
just
emotion.
connected that final little
Uh,
piece in the middle. No one blocked you. You got all the bits together.
yeah, and
You've
so
made
then he'll
this
go,
really long
right,
route.
how do I get that emotion into another game or
Yeah.
something like that? So he focuses really on emotions as an output, but it could also be like, I made a cool map, or
Mm.
I, I did something that was funny later. Like, that's how I
Mm.
often design games. Is like, as you were saying, it's like, is this something you would talk about later, where you go, oh, there was only one kangaroo on there, and I said kangaroo, and that's a hilarious story. And if somebody does that at the end of my game, they go, yeah,
Uh,
that's great. That's a
yeah.
proof of concept.
That's what I like
Um,
about Clock Tower, right? Is that anyone's
yep.
played Clock
Oh,
Tower for any amount of time, everyone's got a story where it's like,
everyone's got
oh,
a
there was this
story.
one game, I
Yep.
was this one character, this thing happened. And you
Yep.
go, even if you're having a shit time, even if you're being fucking waterboarded for an hour and you come away with the story of this was a really cool thing that happened in that game, then you've
Yep.
enjoyed it.
Yeah. And but that's a good measure for any game. Like, obviously, we're
Mm,
not going to make Clock Tower, but if you want to know if your idea is good, if someone at the end of it goes, oh, that was really interesting how X happened. Like, they're telling
mm,
a story about it, they're remembering it and repeating it. That's a sign that they were engaged and they've got a story.
yeah.
And that's only going to happen if they find the puzzle or the interaction or the choices interesting. They're like, oh, I can't believe you did that when I was going to do that. They've
Yeah.
made a story of, this is what I expect, and then things were a bit different, and then things and
It's like
you know,
telling a joke, right?
yeah,
You
that's
go,
right.
this is the build up, here's the diversion of expectations, here's the punchline. Hello,
Yeah.
I've ruined every joke for every person by explaining the formula. But
And
game design can be the same way.
yeah,
And the diversion of expectations can come from other player intervention or whatever. But
yeah,
I think a lot of that stuff should be really interesting. And when you are seeing the players having these super excited conversations about these parts of the game, specific characters or specific mechanics or specific moments, that stuff you want to
yeah,
try and emphasize. That stuff. Like, we talked a lot last episode about dealing with players' feedback as if the feedback was always going to be negative. I feel like
Mm.
sometimes you might hear something and the player has maybe just completely missed the game, but they've just eaten the chocolate cake and there's like a one particular part in it. They're like, I found a raisin or whatever, and they're like, but this is the best. I love this so much. I want to see more of this. And
Mm.
maybe that means you go, oh, okay. Is there a way that I can encourage this to happen? Is there a way that I can make this more of the game? Can I encourage this players to make this choice? I think these kinds of things are really important and
Yeah.
fun. Like getting that, seeing that moment of someone being like, "Wow, cool! I can't believe this happened." And you're like, "Yeah, I can. I've seen it 600 times." But for
But you
me,
have it, yeah.
seeing you enjoying it is
Yeah.
the fun part. I think.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things. Sometimes the purpose of playtesting is just to motivate you. Because if
Mm,
you see somebody just have a smile or a laugh or go, aha, have an emotional
yeah.
reaction to your game, you're like, oh, I have got something here. This
Well,
isn't
yeah,
nothing.
like your experience in the game dev could be bashing your head against the wall because you feel like you're stuck in a certain point. You're
Yeah.
like, I've built all the things. I recognize some of the problems that I have. I don't know how I'm supposed to fix these things. And you take it to a playtesting event, and a bunch of people play it, and they're like, here's some really good feedback. Here's the stuff that I was having a lot of fun with. It injects a lot of energy into you and gives you a lot of motivation for either working on that or gives you fresh ideas to shelf that, take the best bits, make something else. And I think
Yeah.
that's just as important. Like even if you're, let's pretend you make a game and no matter what the feedback was that you got, you go, whatever, I'm actually just going to start from scratch. I'm going to make something completely different. But this thing that I learned, this feedback that I got, this experience that I had, motivated me, taught me something,
Mm.
and I can use that to take my next step. I think that is also really important. I feel like
Yeah.
we just can't undersell the importance of both playtesting but also networking events with other designers.
Mm.
Like, and
Yeah.
that's why Tabletop Tuesday is really good. And like for me, the rewarding part is there's been a few people that have come a few times. Like James. James has been coming regularly now for I want to say 4 months. It could be longer, and he's had nothing to show until last night. And every month I've been like, do you have a thing? And he's like, I'm working on something. Yesterday I got up, I go, do you have your thing ready? And he's like, yeah, but I have to write some notes first and prepare some stuff. I'm like, go and do it because your game is being run tonight. And from what I
Yeah.
heard, the game went really well, right? Or Carlos, who came a whole bunch of times, played a whole bunch of games, and because he's relatively quiet, who obviously doesn't receive the regular inquiry that most people do, I grabbed him and I was like, hey, do you have something? Are you working on something? And he's like, yeah, but I haven't really played it with anybody yet. It's still pretty early. I'm like, well, you have to bring it. We have to see the
Yeah.
game. I want to see what you're working on. That's what you're here for, all right? And then he comes along the next week. A whole bunch of people get to see the game. And he's like, wow, I have all this feedback to work on. I have some ideas. And I got to see people playing it and enjoying it and having fun and seeing the strategic stuff come together. And I'm like,
Mm.
that's got to be really rewarding for you. But also, that's rewarding for me because I feel like I've helped you move along, get to the next
The
step.
next step. Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
at least that brought Grub Cup yesterday.
Yeah.
That's kind of like her first time showing off a board game to other board game designers
Yeah.
because she's still relatively new to this kind of thing, and bringing it along and going, hey, here's my thing, and getting people being like, that's a keychain, that's crazy, that's super innovative and super interesting. Has got to be also like super motivating and empowering to go, actually, I do have a cool idea. Maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe this is actually could be something.
It can be really intimidating to go along to these events when you're a designer.
Mm.
Wondering if you have anything, wondering who these people are,
Or if you belong, like that
or
imposter
if you
syndrome
belong
type
there.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I find that very quickly you find a great deal of leveling. Like as soon as you get in there, and I'm like that too, bringing something good, but then someone will find something in it, and I'll see
Mm.
someone else also nervous and
Mm.
going, oh, this isn't quite good, and I just like, we are all actually really, nobody's actually ahead of anyone, the same, trying the same thing, and that gives you a great sense of relief and connection that you can just go, yeah, this is hard, but we're all trying, and we're all got good ideas that we're working on,
Mm.
and we all belong here.
Mm.
And yeah, I think that's if you're worried about coming along, you don't have to bring something on that first time, but just come along and see, listen to us because we'll tell you like, oh, whatever it is, like I'm stressed, I'm worried,
Mm.
I don't think this is very good, I haven't had an idea for a while, or got something about it, or it's going, and you'll hear things that you've said in your own head, and oh, I do feel, I recognize
Yeah.
these things.
Yeah.
And that can be a real good way to get your footing in a
Yeah.
form, is to just go, oh, those things that I've been thinking, I can hear them out loud.
On that
Yeah.
though, and I preface this statement a lot when I give people advice,
Mm.
is there's different types of advice that game designers will give you based on their expectation on what you're going to do with something. If they
Yep.
think you're a career designer, they're going to give you different advice to if you're a hobby designer. All of the
Yep.
advice
Yep.
that I give is I'm assuming that you're a career designer because I believe in you and I know that you could do this for a living. Because if I could do this for a living and I don't believe that I deserve to be here, then you sure as shit can do it better than me, right?
Yep.
And like that's a bit of my own imposter syndrome, but I don't, and I can understand that I don't deserve to be here, I don't belong to be here, but there's no like, I'm not a game designer, I haven't published a game yet, or I'm not a game designer, I don't have a prototype yet. You're a game
Yep.
designer if you've seen a game and you go, "Ooh, maybe I could change this thing," or "I
Yep.
think I could, maybe this would make it better," or you know what, something that doesn't exist yet that I wish existed that I think maybe I could have a hand in making. You don't have to be the god that is the be all and do all that's going to create an entire product. You can just be a single helping hand in it, and that is just as enough for you to be a game designer. And you thinking about showing up at a playtesting event, I think, is enough to say you are a game designer.
Yeah.
You
That's
clicking
right.
on this stupid podcast where we're talking about being game designers
Yep.
is probably enough for me to believe that you're a game designer. Like, I don't know, man. If I believe in you, you should believe in you.
Good. It's a good point. And yeah, I mean, that's. I always like to treat everyone like they are, a legendary professional in the field.
Yeah, I just assume everyone else knows
Yeah.
more than me. Because
Yeah.
everyone does know something I don't.
If you have that attitude, then you engage really well with people, and you're curious, and you're waiting for them to show you what amazing things they have, and that helps them, go, oh yeah, I can do this. And yeah, it's just a great way to sort of to if we were talking earlier about how to communicate with people, start by assuming that they know more than you do. That's a great way to start. Yeah. I think that's probably our hour for today.
That is.
Next time,
right
as
on.
always, send us your questions.
Or game prototypes. If you want to find one of us on Twitter, send us a DM that is a PDF of whatever you're working on. We'll have a look at it, and if you really want, we can give you some feedback over a video. We'll bring it up on our side monitor or whatever, go through the thing, have a look through it, give you some feedback, whatever. I think we're totally open, because like this is the stuff that we do, right? Like, I got to play a game Steve's working on. I got to play games other people working on. I will bring stuff for other people to work on. This is a pretty regular day-to-day thing that game devs will do. Something that board game devs do a lot more than video game devs, which I think is really interesting. And I think it's a resource that we should exploit as often as possible. But that is our episode. Sorry, I did cut you off again.
That's right. I was going to say, there is more than one brain that you can use, not just your own. Use everyone else's brains as well.
Use ours. That's what we're trying to help. We're trying to help you get your game to reality. And hopefully this video series is doing that. We are trying to crank these out every week, make sure that we have what's going on in our lives, but also a bit of information about what we're doing in the day-to-day, what these kind of skills look like, how you can use these skills, what things that we think are important that maybe the aspiring game designer should know. So hopefully you'll be following along. You can bookmark the playlist because all these episodes of the podcast end up in there. You can watch them all in order, binge it while you're on the train. It's conveniently an hour long, which is the exact commute that I take to go to my playtesting sessions, and be perfect for you. But once again, I am Keith Franks of Cutlass Board Games. This is Steve Dee of Tin Star Games, and we're trying to pretend to be game designers for you.
That's right.
All right, we're clear.
Excellent.